governor, Toyota's top executive in North America, and plenty of local dignitaries are expected to be on site, celebrating, among other things, the fact Toyota's invested nearly $14 billion.
That's an association, a national authority on insurance crime and fraud prevention. The national numbers are trending downwards, but there is still a lot to go over in this report, including the new vehicle that has taken the top spot.
Heads up, Toyota is recalling more than a dozen models of their vehicles in Canada and the U.S.
Something strange is happening in America's auto heartland. Something that feels less like economic turbulence and more like the quiet shifting of tectonic plates. For months, the headlines looked ordinary. Scheduled maintenance shutdowns, temporary production adjustments, supply chain delays. But beneath those polished corporate phrases, something was cracking. The kind of crack that doesn't echo immediately, but spreads slowly, quietly, until suddenly everyone hears the noise at the same time. It began in Kentucky, a place built on horses, bourbon, and the deep hum of factory lines that never seemed to sleep. For 35 years, Toyota's Georgetown plant had been the heartbeat of the state, an industrial giant that could be felt as much as heard. Tens of thousands of livelihoods were tied to its rhythm. Generations grew up believing that as long as those lines kept moving, America's manufacturing identity would remain solid. But sometime last winter, the rhythm changed. The first sign didn't come from an alarm. It came from a whisper. The Lexus ES line was stopping production. Not slowing, stopping. Then came news that the RAV4 line, the best-selling SUV in America, was scaling back. Local suppliers felt the tremor first. Orders reduced, contracts paused, shipment schedules rearranged with unsettling vagueness. It wasn't panic, not yet, but it was the kind of quiet that feels like the air holding its breath. Meanwhile, on stages across the Midwest, the president was declaring a manufacturing boom. A lot of auto jobs coming back, he said. Companies are coming by the tens. You could hear applause. You could hear excitement. But in Kentucky, in Alabama, in Missouri, you could hear something else entirely. The mechanical sigh of a machine slowing down. The truth was hiding in trade ledgers, not speeches. A 25% tariff on all imported cars and auto parts had reshaped the industry overnight. Branded as bold, patriotic, protective, described as the policy that would finally bring manufacturing home. But reality rarely follows slogans. Instead of luring factories back, the tariffs had become a wall made of costs, paperwork, and uncertainty. Automakers, foreign and domestic, suddenly found themselves paying billions just to move parts across borders. Toyota alone reported that the tariffs would cost them $1.25 billion within 2 months. Suppliers in Mexico froze shipments. Japanese plants cut output. American plants faced shortages. Suddenly, what had been sold as a revival began to feel like a slow suffocation. Production across North America fell by an astonishing 20,000 vehicles per day, a 30% drop in output within a single month. The kind of decline charts aren't built to display. Volvo paused expansions. Honda reconsidered investments. Mercedes shifted assembly to Asia. Auto transport carriers reported their weakest volume in 15 years. And in neighborhoods across America, factory workers stared at their schedules, wondering when temporary layoffs became permanent. But while the United States was tightening its borders, something very different was unfolding just a few hundred miles north. Canada moved in the opposite direction. As Washington raised its walls, Ottawa opened its doors. While America leaned into tariffs, Canada leaned into stability, predictable costs, clean energy, long-term strategy, the kind of environment that corporations crave but rarely find. And global automakers noticed quickly. Honda announced the biggest manufacturing investment in Canadian history, an $11 billion electric vehicle and battery complex in Ontario. A project so massive, it would create an entire ecosystem around it. Suppliers, logistics hubs, research labs. Toyota expanded its Canadian operations too, quietly but deliberately. What began as a trickle of interest soon became a migration. Even as uncertainty shook American factories, Canada was building an industrial sector with a direction, a purpose, a plan. And corporations followed not loyalty, not patriotism, but predictability. Canada offered something rare, access to over 50 global markets through CPTPP, USMCA, and multiple EU and UK trade agreements. Vehicles built in Ontario could move freely across continents. Meanwhile, vehicles built in Kentucky were colliding with tariff walls, rising production costs, and political volatility. By 2025, Japanese automakers were producing nearly half of all vehicles manufactured in Canada. Toyota built 500,000 cars there. Honda built 430,000 new EV hubs, promised 25,000 high-skilled jobs. And the country's clean power grid meant production costs for EVs were 20% lower than in the United States. Canada, a nation often underestimated in industrial strategy, had quietly become the most stable auto manufacturing zone in North America. Back in the United States, the consequences were everywhere, though never announced loudly. Imported steel, aluminum, and copper grew 18% to 42% more expensive. Since 40% of an American-built vehicle relies on foreign components, every price increase rippled through the entire system. The average new car crossed the $50,000 threshold, unthinkable a decade earlier. Parts manufacturers began falling like dominoes. Over 500 small and medium-sized suppliers reduced operations, suspended production, or shut down entirely. Without steady volumes, without predictable costs, without confidence, they simply couldn't survive. Plants idled, shifts disappeared, schedules thinned. The hum of American factories, the hum that once defined industrial power, grew uneven. In Kentucky, suppliers described it as a storm forming behind clear skies. In Alabama, workers compared it to watching the tide leave the shore and knowing something big is coming back. The fear wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, resigned, heavy, because everyone could see the truth forming, even if no one dared say it. The policies meant to save American auto jobs were pushing them north. Toyota's financials painted the same picture. Losses reached $9.5 billion, the steepest in the industry. Tariff costs alone hit $3 billion in one quarter. Executives were blunt. Protectionism doesn't save jobs. It moves them. And they were right. For decades, American manufacturing relied on a web, a delicate, interconnected system stretching from Japan to Mexico to Michigan. The tariffs didn't strengthen that web. They tore holes into it. By spring of 2025, even Ford and GM were forced to cut their output by up to 10%. Not because their factories couldn't build, but because the economics no longer made sense. As one industry analyst put it, we're not losing the race. We're tripping over our own shoelaces. Meanwhile, Canada wasn't just catching up, it was transforming. Battery plants, EV research centers, critical mineral supply chains. Ontario and Quebec were becoming a North American equivalent of South Korea's manufacturing boom. Investment followed investment. Confidence followed confidence. By 2030, analysts warned, the United States could lose up to a quarter of the North American auto supply chain if high tariffs remained in place. Canada, by contrast, could capture up to 40% of total EV and battery manufacturing capacity across the continent. It's a quiet revolution, a slow, steady reshaping of the map. In the end, this story is larger than Toyota, larger than tariffs, larger than Kentucky or Ontario. It's a story about what happens when politics collides with reality, when slogans collide with economics, when short-term applause collides with long-term consequence. One nation raised walls, the other built bridges. One chased headlines, the other chased strategy. One is holding on to the past, the other is planning for the future. And the future, it seems, has already chosen its direction. So, as America confronts the consequences of its own policies, and as Canada rises in the quiet, steady way that only Canada does, one question remains. In a world where stability is power, where strategy is currency, where predictability is gold, who truly wins the race? The answer may not lie in the factories of today, but in the decisions being made right now. Thanks for watching. And if this opened your eyes, even a little, hit like and subscribe. Because in an age of noise, clarity deserves its place.